GM told everyone the 6.2-liter problem was fixed. New oil, a diagnostic scan, and if your engine passed, you were supposedly good to go. That was April of 2025. Now, in the middle of 2026, the federal government has expanded its investigation to cover nearly 1 million trucks and SUVs. And some of the engines failing are ones that already went through the recall repair, and even some brand new engines that were installed as replacements. I have had 3 of these trucks in my shop this year alone, and I am going to walk you through exactly what happened, what GM actually knew, and what you need to check on your own truck before this gets worse. Let us get into it. Back in January of 2026, a regular customer of mine, a guy who drives a 2022 Silverado 1500 for his HVAC business, brought his truck in because it had gone through the L87 recall the previous summer. The dealer inspected it, found nothing wrong internally, and sent him home with a note that they had switched him over to 0W40 oil. 8 months later, he is idling at a red light, and the truck just dies. No warning light beforehand, no rough running, nothing. It restarted, but it felt different, like it was down on power. I hooked up a scanner and pulled a P0016 code, crankshaft to camshaft correlation fault, which is the exact code GM uses to flag a failing rotating assembly on this engine. That code means the timing relationship between the crank and the cam has shifted, which on this engine almost always means bearing wear or a bent connecting rod is letting things move that should not be moving. I told him not to drive it. He towed it to the dealer, and it turned out the bearings were already scored despite passing inspection 8 months earlier. Here is what most owners do not understand about this recall, and it is the reason the investigation has grown into what it is now. The original recall, Campaign 25 V274, covered roughly 600,000 vehicles with L87 6.2-liter V8 engines built between March 1st, 2021 and May 31st, 2024. GM traced the failures to 2 separate manufacturing problems from a third-party supplier. The first was sediment, essentially manufacturing debris, left inside the connecting rods and the crankshaft oil galleries. That sediment circulates through the oiling system and grinds away at the bearing surfaces from the inside. The second was crankshafts that were out of spec on dimension and surface finish, meaning the journals the bearings ride on were not machined to the tolerance this engine needs to survive daily use. Put those 2 problems together, and you get bearings that wear prematurely, oil pressure that drops, and eventually a rod that lets go or a crank that seizes. GM's fix depended on which category your truck fell into. If your engine failed the diagnostic scan, meaning it already showed signs of bearing damage, you got a full engine replacement. If it passed, you got switched to a thicker 0W40 oil, which was supposed to give the bearings a bigger margin of protection going forward. For a lot of owners, that felt like a reasonable fix. New oil, clean bill of health, back on the road. The problem is the oil change was never a repair. It was a bet that thicker oil could compensate for bearings and crankshafts that were already out of spec from the factory, and for a growing number of owners, that bet did not pay off. By January of 2026, NHTSA had already received 36 separate reports of engines failing in trucks that had gone through the recall remedy. Engines inspected, oil changed, paperwork signed, and they were still seizing. That is what triggered Recall Query RQ 26-001, which is the federal government formally asking GM whether the fix they issued actually works. A recall query is not a courtesy check. It means investigators had enough failure reports coming in after the supposed fix that they needed GM to explain itself. And as that inquiry moved forward through 2026, the numbers kept climbing. I had a second truck come through my shop in the spring, a 2023 GMC Sierra 1500 that had received a full replacement engine under the original recall because it failed the scan the first time. Brand new long block installed by the dealer. That truck lost propulsion on the highway 11 months later. Not a used, potentially contaminated original engine, a brand new replacement engine that GM installed specifically to fix the problem. That is the detail that should stop every GM truck owner in their tracks, because it means this was never just about a bad batch of parts from 2021 through 2024. Something in the supply chain or the assembly process kept producing engines with the same underlying weakness, even after GM said they had corrected it. That is exactly what NHTSA found when they dug deeper. The investigation identified 191 additional failure reports involving L87 engines built after the original recall's May 31st, 2024 cutoff date. Engines GM had specifically said were not part of the problem. That pushed the total number of new failure incidents under review to 690, and it forced regulators to stop treating this as a closed chapter tied to a 3-year production window. In August of 2026, NHTSA escalated the case from a recall query to a full engineering analysis designated EA26005. That is a significant step up. A recall query asks whether an existing fix is holding up. An engineering analysis is regulators taking the components apart themselves, examining supplier manufacturing controls, and building a technical case for whether the entire remedy needs to change. It is usually one of the last steps before an agency either forces a bigger recall or accepts that no further action is needed. Given what has been found so far, nobody involved expects this one to end quietly. The scope of that engineering analysis is what should get every GM truck owner's attention, because it now covers 997,743 vehicles, model years 2021 through 2026. That includes Chevrolet Silverado 1500, GMC Sierra 1500, Tahoe, Suburban, Yukon, and Cadillac Escalade, essentially the entire lineup of GM's L87 equipped trucks and SUVs. And this is the part that catches people off guard. If you bought a brand new 2025 or 2026 model specifically to avoid the recall era engines, your truck is now inside the population NHTSA is investigating. That does not mean your engine has the defect. It means regulators have received enough field reports to justify studying whether the problem extends past the window GM originally identified, and a 2025 or 2026 truck can show 0 open recalls on a VIN check while still sitting inside the group being reviewed. To put the scale of this in perspective, GM's own documentation filed with the federal government before the original recall even happened showed 28,102 field complaints involving the L87 engine. Of those, 14,332 involved a complete loss of propulsion while driving, meaning the truck just shut off with the driver still behind the wheel, sometimes at highway speed. 12 of those incidents resulted in a crash and 12 people were injured. Those numbers are from the original recall filing. They do not include anything reported in the year and a half since. If you drive a Silverado, Sierra, Tahoe, Suburban, Yukon, or Escalade with the 6.2-liter V8, here is what I am telling every customer who brings one into my shop right now. First, do a VIN search directly through NHTSA or through the recall page for your specific brand, not just a general Google search, because a badge or trim level is not a substitute for checking your actual VIN. Second, if your truck already went through the recall and you were switched to 0W40 oil, that does not mean you are in the clear. Watch for early warning signs, a ticking noise from the bottom end that was not there before, a drop in oil pressure on the gauge, any hesitation or rough idle, and especially a check engine light. with a P0016 code. Do not keep driving on a P0016. That code is telling you the internal timing relationship in this engine has already shifted, and continuing to drive it risks a complete engine failure while you are on the road. Third, keep every piece of paperwork, the original recall repair order, any oil change receipts, and if your engine has already been replaced once, keep that paperwork too, because if this engineering analysis results in an expanded recall, documentation is what determines whether you get covered. If this kind of honest reporting is useful to you, hit subscribe because I am tracking this investigation and I will update you the moment GM or NHTSA announces anything new. What makes this situation different from a typical recall is that GM already used its best fix, and the failures kept coming anyway. That is not a small technical footnote. That is the reason a recall query became an engineering analysis, and the reason nearly 1 million vehicles are now part of a federal investigation instead of 600,000. Not every engineering analysis ends in a bigger recall. Sometimes regulators conclude the existing remedy was adequate and close the case. But given that this analysis exists specifically because engines kept failing after the original fix, including brand new replacement engines, I would not bet on that outcome if I were a GM engineer right now. Until NHTSA finishes its review, the long-term reliability picture on this engine is genuinely unresolved, and anyone telling you with total confidence how this ends is guessing. What I can tell you with confidence after pulling codes on 3 of these trucks myself this year is that the smart move right now is checking your VIN, watching for that P0016 code, and not assuming a completed recall repair means your engine is safe for the next 100,000 miles. If you want to know which GM engines have actually earned a reputation in my shop for going the distance without any of this drama, I covered that in a separate video and it is right here. Take care of your truck, watch your gauges, and I will see you in the next one.